The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen such chaos. Representatives from 47 different species filled the massive chamber, but nobody was sitting in their assigned seats. Instead, they were all moving around, frantically talking, in loud voices and waving their arms or tentacles or whatever body parts they used to show their fear. Captain Juan stood near the back wall watching everything unfold. He was the only human in the room, and most of the other beings barely noticed he was there. Earth had joined the galactic community only 5 years ago, which made humans the newest members by far. To most of the older species, humans were still just primitive newcomers who had barely figured out how to travel between stars. Ambassador Kira was at the center of the chaos. She belonged to a bird-like species called the Talons, and her bright yellow feathers were now standing straight up, in alarm. She kept making sharp clicking sounds with her beak while pointing at the huge display screen that dominated one wall of the chamber. The screen showed a map of their galaxy, but large sections of it were now completely black. Commander Vex floated nearby in his crystal suit that sparkled with different colors as his emotions changed. Right now, the colors were all dark reds and purples, which meant he was very angry and scared. His species, the Shimmers, were made of living crystal, and they could project images directly from their minds. The holographic star charts he was creating showed the same terrible truth as the main screen. 17 star systems were gone, not destroyed or damaged, but completely gone as if they had never existed at all. In each case, the same thing had happened. First, the outer planets would disappear. Then the inner worlds would vanish one by one. Finally, even the star itself would be consumed, leaving nothing but empty space where millions of beings had once lived. The thing responsible for all this destruction had a simple name that struck fear into every species in the galaxy. They called it the Void Eater. Elder Nix was trying to restore order to the meeting, but his telepathic abilities were not working well with so many panicked minds in the room. His species, the Mind Weavers, could normally calm any situation by projecting peaceful thoughts, but the fear was too strong today. His long gray robes fluttered as he moved between different groups, trying to get them to listen. Captain Juan had been studying the reports for weeks now. The Void Eater had first appeared 3 months ago at the edge of the galaxy in a remote system that most species had never heard of. At first, nobody paid much attention because strange things happened. All the time in space. Suns died, stars exploded, and sometimes whole planets would be destroyed by cosmic accidents. But this was different. The Void Eater was not a natural disaster. It moved with purpose, always heading toward areas with more life and more planets to consume. It seemed to be following the major trade routes, as if it knew exactly where to find the most populated systems. The worst part was that nothing could stop it. The first few species to encounter the creature had tried to fight it with their most powerful weapons. Energy beams that could cut through mountains passed right through the Void Eater without causing any damage. Nuclear missiles that could destroy cities simply disappeared when they got too close to the dark mass. The Titan race had been the most confident about stopping the threat. They were ancient warriors whose technology was thousands of years ahead of most other species. Their battle cruisers were the size of small moons, and their weapons could crack planets in half. When they heard about the Void Eater, they had laughed and said it would be easy to destroy. 3 days later, their entire fleet was gone. Not even wreckage remained to show where the mighty Titan warriors had made their last stand. The Void Eater had consumed everything and grown even larger in the process. That was when the real panic began. If the Titans could not stop this thing, then nobody could. Species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly started working together. The proud flame dancers who never asked anyone for help sent desperate messages begging for assistance. The isolationist crystal singers opened their borders and offered their most advanced shields to anyone who needed them. But nothing worked. Every defense failed. Every weapon proved useless. The Void Eater continued its steady advance toward the core systems where billions of beings lived and worked. Captain Juan watched Ambassador Kira spread her wings wide as she addressed the crowd. Her voice was high and sharp when she spoke the common galactic language. "We have tried everything," she said. "Our greatest scientists have studied this creature for months. Our most powerful weapons have been used against it. Even our ancient artifacts and forbidden technologies have failed. We are facing something that we do not understand and cannot fight." Commander Vex projected new images that showed the predicted path of the Void Eater. If it continued at its current speed, it would reach the galactic capital in less than 2 weeks. The crystal being's voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke, but today the sound was harsh and discordant. "We should evacuate everyone," he said. "Load the transport ships and head for the outer rim. Maybe if we scatter in all directions, some of us will survive until this thing moves on to another galaxy." Elder Nix shook his head slowly. His telepathic abilities let him sense the thoughts and feelings of everyone in the room. He knew that running away would not work because the Void Eater seemed to be specifically hunting populated areas. It would follow the refugees no matter how far they ran. There was something else bothering the old Mind Weaver. Deep in the ancient archives of his people, there were references to a similar creature from long ago. The records were incomplete and mostly damaged, but they suggested that one species had encountered such a being before and somehow survived. The problem was that nobody knew which species the records were talking about. The fragments were written in symbols that predated most current civilizations. They mentioned techniques and approaches that seemed primitive and ineffective compared to modern methods. But they also mentioned something called a taming protocol, not destruction or defeat, but actual taming as if the creature could be controlled or reasoned with. To most of the advanced species in the galaxy, this seemed impossible. How could you tame something that consumed entire star systems? As Elder Nix stood to address the council, Captain Juan felt a strange sensation. Something about the old records sounded familiar, even though he had never heard of them before. There was something in the back of his mind that suggested humanity might know more about this situation than anyone realized. The Mind Weaver's voice was soft, but it carried clearly through the chamber. "My people have found ancient records," he announced. "They speak of another species that faced a similar threat in the distant past. We do not know who they were, but they found a way to stop the creature without destroying it." A murmur went through the crowd. Hope mixed with desperation as beings who had thought they were doomed suddenly saw a possibility of survival. "We will search for these beings," Elder Nix continued. "We will examine every database and every archive until we find them. They may be our only chance." Captain Juan said nothing, but his mind was racing. Something told him that the search would not take as long as the council expected. In fact, he had a growing suspicion that the mysterious species they were looking for might be closer than anyone imagined. Dr. Leah had been working without sleep for 15 hours straight in the human research station orbiting Earth. While the other galactic species threw their most advanced computers and artificial intelligence systems at the ancient data fragments, she was using a completely different approach. She relied on something that humans were known for throughout the galaxy, but which other species often dismissed as primitive intuition. The research station was small compared to the massive facilities that other species operated. The Shimmers had crystal computers the size of buildings that could process millions of calculations per second. The Mind Weavers used telepathic networks that connected hundreds of their greatest scholars. The Titans had war computers that had been designed to analyze enemy weaknesses in microseconds. But Dr. Leah sat alone in a simple room with nothing but basic translation software and printed copies of the data fragments. She had covered every wall with papers showing symbols, patterns, and mathematical equations. To anyone else, it would have looked like chaos, but to her trained eye, there was a pattern emerging. The breakthrough came at exactly 3 in the morning, when her tired brain finally made the connection she had been searching for. The symbols in the ancient records were not completely unknown. Parts of them looked familiar, in a way that made her heart race with excitement and fear. She had been approaching the translation as if it were a completely alien language, but suddenly she realized her mistake. The mathematical constants were not just similar to human mathematics, they were identical. The star positions matched constellations that were visible from Earth. Most importantly, the behavioral descriptions of the creature matched exactly with what the Void Eater was doing now. Dr. Leah ran to her communication console and sent an urgent message to Captain Juan, who was still at the Galactic Council meetings. Her hands were shaking as she typed because she could barely believe what she had discovered. The data fragments were not written by some unknown alien species. They were human records from Earth's ancient past, written in a form of their own language that was so old that even their most advanced translation programs could not fully decode it. Somehow, humanity had faced this exact same threat thousands of years ago. When Captain Juan received the message, he had to read it 3 times before he could accept what Dr. Leah was telling him. He was sitting in a small waiting area outside the main council chamber, where species representatives were taking turns presenting their evacuation plans and desperate defense strategies. He contacted Dr. Leah immediately using his personal communicator. Her voice was excited but also frightened when she explained what she had found. "Captain Juan, the records are definitely human," she said. "I can see traces of ancient Korean Chinese and several other Earth languages mixed together. But the really incredible part is that these records describe the exact same creature we are facing now. The same consumption patterns, the same growth rate, even the same way it ignores energy weapons." Captain Juan felt his mind spinning as he tried to understand the implications. If the records were human, that meant the Void Eater had attacked Earth before yet their homeworld still existed and thrived. Somehow their ancestors had not only survived, but had found a way to stop the creature. "Tell me everything," he said. "What else do the records say?" Dr. Leah shuffled through her papers and pulled up several screens of translated text. "Most of it is still unclear," she said, "but I can make out references to something called the Taming Protocol. That matches what Elder Nix mentioned in the council meeting. But, Captain, there is something else that is really strange." "What is it?" he asked. "The records do not describe fighting the creature at all. There are no mentions of weapons or battles or destruction. Instead, they talk about understanding and healing and something they call feeding the hunger. It is almost like they treated the Void Eater as a sick animal instead of a monster." Captain Juan was quiet for a long moment as he processed this information. Around him, he could hear the voices of other species representatives discussing evacuation, routes, and final defense plans. They were all thinking in terms of military solutions and technological responses, but apparently humans had taken a completely different approach thousands of years ago. "Keep working on the translation," he told Dr. Leah. "Find out everything you can about this taming protocol. I am going to inform the council about what we have discovered." As Dr. Leah went back to her research, Captain Juan faced a difficult decision. The other species barely respected humanity as it was. If he told them that humans claimed to have faced this threat before, they might not believe him. Worse, they might think he was lying to make his species seem more important. But while he was debating what to do, new reports started coming in from the outer systems. The Void Eater had changed its behavior. Instead of slowly consuming one system at a time, it was now moving much faster. 3 more star systems had gone dark in just the past day, and the creature seemed to be accelerating toward the galactic. Capital Dr. Leah worked frantically to decode more of the ancient records as Captain Juan returned to the council chamber. The mood inside was even more desperate than before. Several species representatives were openly crying or making the sounds that their people made when faced with death. Elder Nix was standing at the center of the room trying to coordinate the search for the mysterious species that had left the ancient records. Teams of researchers from dozens of different civilizations were examining every database and archive they could access, but they had found no trace of who might have written the fragments. Captain Juan knew he had to speak up even if the other species did not believe him. He stood and raised his hand to get Elder Nix's attention. The old mind weaver looked surprised because humans rarely spoke during council sessions. Elder Nick's Captain Juan said in a clear voice that carried across the chamber, "We have found the species you are looking for." The entire room fell silent. Hundreds of beings from dozens of different worlds all turned to stare at the human representative. Ambassador Kira folded her wings and tilted her bird-like head in confusion. Commander Vex stopped projecting his holographic displays, and his crystal body flickered with uncertain colors. "The species that left those ancient records," Captain Juan continued, "is humanity. The fragments are written in old Earth languages. Our people faced this same creature thousands of years ago, and we found a way to stop it without destroying it." The reaction was immediate and loud. Several species representatives started talking at once, while others made sounds of disbelief. Ambassador Kira squawked sharply and spread her wings in a gesture that meant she thought Captain Juan was lying. Commander Vex projected angry red symbols that flashed in the air above his head, but Elder Nix held up his hand for silence. His telepathic abilities allowed him to sense that Captain Juan was telling the truth, at least as far as he knew it. The human genuinely believed what he was saying. "Explain," Elder Nix said simply. Captain Juan took a deep breath and began to tell them everything that Dr. Leah had discovered. He explained how the mathematical constants matched human calculations, and how the star positions were visible from Earth. He described the behavioral patterns that were identical between the ancient records and the current Void Eater. Most importantly, he told them about the taming protocol and how the ancient humans seemed to have treated the creature not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as something that could be understood and helped. When he finished speaking, the chamber was quiet for a long time. Finally, Ambassador Kira spoke in a voice that was sharp with disbelief. "You expect us to believe she said that your primitive species defeated something that destroyed our most advanced civilizations? You expect us to trust techniques that are thousands of years old when our modern technology has failed completely?" Captain Juan met her gaze steadily. "I expect you to consider every option," he said, "because in 2 weeks, that thing will reach the galactic capital, and millions of beings will die. If you have a better plan, I would love to hear it." But even as the council debated whether to believe the human claims, Dr. Leah was making another discovery that would change everything. Deep in the most damaged fragments of the ancient records, she had found something that made her blood run cold. The Void Eater was not just similar to the creature their ancestors had faced. It was the exact same being, and it was coming back to finish what it had started thousands of years ago. Professor Jin arrived at the Human Research Station just as Dr. Leah made her most shocking discovery. He was humanity's leading expert on alien life forms and had been called in to help understand what their ancestors had learned about the Void Eater. As the transport ship docked with the station, Dr. Leah was staring at her translation screens with a look of complete amazement. The final pieces of the ancient records had revealed something that changed everything they thought they knew about the creature that was terrorizing the galaxy. Professor Jin found Dr. Leah surrounded by even more papers and data displays than before. Her eyes were red from exhaustion, but they were also bright with excitement. "Professor Jin," she said without even looking up from her work, "you need to see this immediately. Everything we thought about the Void Eater is wrong. Everything the entire galaxy believes about it is completely incorrect." Professor Jin set down his equipment and walked over to examine the translations that Dr. Leah had spread across multiple screens. His specialty was understanding how different life forms behaved and evolved, so he knew how to read biological data even when it came from ancient human records. "What did you find?" he asked as he began scanning through the information. Dr. Leah pointed to a section of translated text that she had highlighted in bright yellow. "The Void Eater is not a natural creature," she said. "It was created by an ancient species as a biological weapon. But Professor Jin, that is not the important part. The important part is that it is still a living being with biological needs, just like any other life form." Professor Jin read through the data carefully. His understanding of alien biology helped him see patterns that Dr. Leah might have missed. The more he read, the more excited he became, because the ancient human records contained information that was incredibly advanced for their time. According to these records, he said the creature was designed to be the ultimate planet killer. It was supposed to consume everything in its path and grow stronger with each world it destroyed. But something went wrong with its programming or its biology. Dr. Leah nodded enthusiastically. Exactly, she said. The ancient humans discovered that the Void Eater was not randomly destroying everything it encountered. It was actually searching for something specific. All the consumption and destruction was just a side effect of its desperate hunt for whatever it needed. Professor Jin studied the biological analysis that the ancient humans had somehow managed to perform. Their technology was primitive compared to current galactic standards, but their understanding of living creatures was surprisingly sophisticated. They had realized something that all the advanced civilizations of today had missed. The Void Eater was sick. It was not a malicious destroyer or an evil force of nature. It was a created being that had been wandering the galaxy for millions of years, searching for something that would satisfy its biological requirements. When it could not find what it needed, it would consume entire planets, hoping that somewhere, in all that matter and energy, it would finally discover what its body was craving. Look at this section, Dr. Leah said as she pulled up another screen. The ancient humans describe it as being like a starving animal that eats everything it can find because it does not know what food will actually help it. The more desperate it becomes, the more it consumes, but it never finds satisfaction. Professor Jin began to understand why the weapons and defenses of the galactic civilizations had failed so completely. They had been trying to fight a creature that was not actually attacking them. The Void Eater was just trying to survive and heal itself, the only way it knew how. The ancient records described how human shamans and early scientists had worked together to understand the creature. They had combined their primitive knowledge of animal behavior with basic biological science. Instead of trying to destroy the Void Eater, they had tried to figure out what it actually needed. What they discovered was that the creature was suffering from a form of cosmic malnutrition. It had been designed to feed on specific types of organic compounds and energy frequencies that were extremely rare in the galaxy. Without these nutrients, it could not function properly, and its desperate search was driving it to consume everything in its path. Professor Jin looked up from the records with wonder in his eyes. So the taming protocol was not really about taming at all, he said. It was about healing. The ancient humans found a way to give the creature what it actually needed, instead of trying to stop it from taking what it thought it needed. Dr. Leah smiled for the first time in days. That is exactly right, she said. They created a combination of biological materials and energy frequencies that satisfied the creature's nutritional requirements. Once it was properly fed, it stopped being destructive and actually became helpful. The records described how the healed Void Eater had transformed from a cosmic horror into something more like a space whale. It began to spread life-giving elements throughout the galaxy instead of consuming them. The ancient humans had essentially cured a sick animal that had been terrorizing civilizations for millions of years. But there was still one major problem. Professor Jin pointed to a section of the records that described the specific compounds and frequencies that the creature needed. These biological materials can only be found on Earth, he said, and some of these energy patterns require technology that we have developed only in the last few decades. Dr. Leah had already thought about this challenge. That is why the ancient humans could only provide temporary relief, she said. They could ease the creature's suffering for a while, but they could not permanently cure it with their primitive resources. That is why it left Earth and continued wandering the galaxy. Professor Jin realized what this meant. The Void Eater was not returning to finish destroying Earth. It was coming back because it remembered that humans had helped it before. In its alien mind, Earth was the only place in the galaxy where it had ever found relief from its constant hunger and pain. But now humanity had something their ancestors did not have. They had modern technology and access to materials from across the galaxy. They could create a permanent solution instead of just a temporary one. The question was whether the Galactic Council would trust them to try. Professor Jin knew that the other species were still debating whether to believe Captain Juan's claims about the ancient records. They found it hard to accept that primitive humans could have succeeded where their advanced civilizations had failed. Dr. Leah was already working on the next phase of their research. She had begun calculating exactly what materials and equipment they would need to create the healing compounds described in the ancient texts. The process would require biological samples from Earth combined with rare elements that humanity had been mining from asteroids for their industrial projects. "We can do this, Professor Jin," she said with determination in her voice. "We can actually cure this creature permanently, but we will need the Council's permission to attempt the mission. And we will need other species to provide some of the materials we cannot obtain ourselves." Professor Jin looked out the window of the research station at the stars beyond. Somewhere, out there, the Void Eater was continuing its advance toward the galactic capital. 3 more systems had been consumed while they worked on the translations. Billions of beings were evacuating their homeworlds in panic. But now, humanity knew the truth. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced was not really a threat at all. It was just a very old, very sick creature that needed help. The challenge would be convincing the other species to trust human wisdom over their own advanced technology. As if reading his thoughts, Dr. Leah looked up from her calculations. "Do you think they will believe us?" she asked. Professor Jin considered the question carefully. The galactic civilizations were proud of their technological achievements. They had always solved problems through superior science and overwhelming force. The idea of healing instead of fighting would be difficult for them to accept, but the Void Eater had already proven that their methods did not work. When facing complete extinction, even the most advanced species might be willing to try something different. "They will have to believe us," he said finally, "because we are their only hope, and deep down they know it." Captain Juan presented the findings to the Galactic Council, but the reaction was far from positive. Commander Vex's crystalline form flashed angry red as he dismissed the human theory as primitive nonsense. Ambassador Kira squawked in frustration, demanding real weapons instead of what she called cosmic psychology. The other species couldn't comprehend the human approach. Their advanced civilizations had always solved problems through superior technology and overwhelming force. The concept of understanding and healing rather than destroying was completely alien to their way of thinking. Even as the Void Eater consumed 2 more systems, including a major military stronghold, the Council refused to authorize the human plan. But Dr. Leah had been busy during the debate. Working with a small team of human volunteers, she had begun synthesizing the specific organic compounds described in the ancient texts. The process required a combination of biological materials that could only be found on Earth, mixed with rare elements that humanity had been mining from asteroids for decades. Lieutenant Dong and Sergeant Bei volunteered to pilot the delivery mission, even though the success rate seemed impossibly low. They would need to fly directly into the Void Eater's core, something that had destroyed every previous vessel that attempted such an approach. The difference was that instead of weapons, their ship would carry what the ancient texts called the healing light, a combination of nutrients, hormones, and electromagnetic frequencies that would satisfy the entity's desperate biological needs. As they prepared for launch, the Void Eater reached the outer defensive line of the galactic capital system. Millions of refugees fled in all directions, while the combined fleets of a dozen species prepared for what everyone believed would be their final futile battle. The small human vessel approached the Void Eater while the largest space battle in galactic history raged all around them. Lieutenant Dong gripped the controls tightly as massive alien warships the size of cities were consumed like toys by the creature they were trying to heal. The battle fleet that had taken weeks to assemble was disappearing in minutes as the Void Eater continued its steady advance toward the galactic capital. Sergeant Bay monitored the precious cargo in their ship's hold while explosions from dying warships lit up the darkness around them. The biological synthesis equipment hummed quietly as it maintained the exact temperature and energy frequencies needed to keep the healing compounds stable. One mistake or equipment failure would render their sacrifice meaningless. The Void Eater had grown even larger since the last reports, reaching nearly the size of Earth's moon. Its dark tendrils stretched out for thousands of kilometers in all, directions reaching toward anything that contained matter or energy. Where the tendrils touched, warships simply ceased to exist, absorbed so completely that not even debris remained. Lieutenant Dong piloted their ship through the chaos with skill that amazed even his own people. Massive shimmer crystal ships were exploding into brilliant light shows while Titan battlecruisers fired their planet-killing weapons uselessly into the creature's expanding mass. The human vessel was so small compared to the other ships that most of the battle fleet did not even notice it was there. Dr. Leah's voice crackled over their communication system from the research station back at Earth. She was monitoring their approach and providing real-time analysis of the readings their instruments were transmitting back to human space. Her voice was tense but filled with determination as she guided them toward their target. "Lieutenant Dong Sergeant Bay," she said through the static caused by the creature's energy field, "you are approaching the outer absorption layer. According to the ancient records, this is where the Void Eater processes most of the matter it consumes. Your instruments should be detecting massive amounts of organic activity." Sergeant Bay checked his readings and confirmed what Dr. Leah had predicted. Their scanners were showing biological signatures unlike anything science had previously encountered. The darkness around them was not empty space, but was filled with living tissue that functioned on a scale that defied comprehension. As they penetrated deeper into the creature's outer layers, their instruments went wild with readings that should have been impossible. The Void Eater was not just a single organism, but was actually a complex biological system with different specialized regions that served different functions in its cosmic-sized body. What they discovered as they flew deeper challenged everything that galactic science thought it knew about life in the universe. The creature was ancient beyond measure, with biological systems that had been growing and adapting for millions of years. Its consciousness was vast and alien, but it was definitely intelligent in a way that most species would never understand. Dr. Leah analyzed the data they were transmitting, and her voice became excited as she realized what they were seeing. "Lieutenant Dong," she said, "you are flying through the equivalent of the creature's digestive system. But look at these readings. The biological processes are not functioning correctly. The creature is trying to extract nutrients from everything it absorbs, but it cannot find what it actually needs." Professor Jin joined the communication from the research station as their ship continued deeper into the Void Eater's body. His expertise in alien biology helped him interpret the scanner readings that were flooding their instruments with information about the creature's internal structure. "Sergeant Bay," he said, "focus your scans on the neural activity patterns. According to the ancient records, the creature's consciousness should be fragmented due to its prolonged malnutrition. It may not even remember what it is supposed to be looking for." The readings confirmed Professor Jin's theory. The Void Eater's mind had been damaged by millions of years of starvation and desperate searching. Its thoughts were scattered and confused, like an animal that had been lost and hungry for so long that it could no longer remember what home looked like. Lieutenant Dong guided their ship toward what appeared to be the creature's core following navigation data that had been calculated from the ancient human records. As they flew deeper, the biological activity around them became more intense, but also more chaotic. The creature's body was working desperately to process the matter it had consumed, but nothing was providing the specific nutrients it needed. The most heartbreaking discovery came when their instruments detected the creature's emotional state. Sergeant Bay had specialized sensors that could read biological stress patterns, and what he found made him understand why the ancient humans had chosen healing over violence. The Void Eater was not angry or malicious. It was scared and in pain. Its massive intelligence was trapped in a body that had been designed for a specific purpose but could no longer fulfill that function. It had been wandering the galaxy alone for longer than most civilizations had existed, consuming everything in its path in a desperate search for relief that never came. Dr. Leah's voice broke slightly as she processed the emotional readings they were transmitting. "The creature is suffering," she said. "It has been suffering for millions of years, and it does not understand why. No wonder the ancient humans chose compassion over force." As they approached the core of the Void Eater, something unexpected happened. The chaotic consumption around them began to slow down. The creature's tendrils stopped reaching out as aggressively toward the battle fleet and instead seemed to be focusing on the small human ship that was flying directly into its body. Lieutenant Dong felt the ship shudder as massive biological sensors examined their vessel. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Void Eater had encountered beings who were not trying to destroy it, but were actually trying to approach it peacefully. Professor Jin monitored the creature's neural activity and reported changes. That gave him hope. The Void Eater's consciousness was responding to their presence in ways that suggested it might actually remember Earth and the help that humans had provided thousands of years ago. Sergeant Bay prepared the healing compounds for release as they approached the target area described in the ancient records. The core of the creature was a massive biological structure the size of a city that served as both brain and digestive center. This was where the healing compounds would need to be delivered in order to provide permanent relief. The final approach was the most dangerous part of their mission. They had to fly directly into the creature's most sensitive biological systems while carrying compounds that could either heal or accidentally poison the massive being. One mistake could trigger defensive reactions that would destroy not just their ship, but potentially kill the creature they were trying to save. As Lieutenant Dong positioned their ship for the final release, Dr. Leah made one last check of all their calculations. Everything had to be perfect, because they would only get one chance. The biological compounds were designed to integrate with the creature's systems and provide the specific nutrients it had been searching for throughout the galaxy. The moment of truth had arrived. Sergeant Bay activated the release mechanism and watched as the healing compounds spread through the creature's core biological systems. Now they could only wait and hope that humanity's ancient wisdom would prove strong enough to heal a cosmic wound that had been festering for millions of years. The release of the healing compounds created a reaction that nobody had expected, not even Dr. Leah and Professor Jin, who had spent weeks studying the ancient records. As the biosynthesized nutrients spread through the Void Eater's massive core, biological systems the creature began to change in ways that amazed everyone who witnessed it. The first sign that something was happening came from the creature's outer tendrils. Instead of the chaotic grasping movements that had been consuming everything in their path, the dark extensions began to move with purpose and coordination. The random destruction stopped completely as the Void Eater's consciousness started to clear for the first time in millions of years. Lieutenant Dong and Sergeant Bay watched in wonder from inside the creature's body as bioluminescent patterns began to appear throughout the organic structures around them. The darkness that had defined the Void Eater was being replaced by a soft, gentle glow that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a massive heartbeat. Commander Vex and Ambassador Kira observed the transformation from their command ships in the battle fleet that had been preparing for its final desperate stand. The crystalline being's body flickered with colors that indicated complete confusion, while the bird-like representative folded her wings and stared in disbelief at what was happening. The Void Eater was still enormous, but instead of consuming everything around it, the creature began to do something that had never been recorded in galactic history. It started to give back. Energy that had been stored in its biological systems for millions of years began flowing outward, not as destructive force, but as pure, life-giving light. Dr. Leah monitored the transformation from her research station and tried to explain what was happening to the amazed representatives of the Galactic Council. Her voice was filled with wonder as she described readings that seemed impossible according to everything that science knew about cosmic-level organisms. "The creature is not just being healed," she reported. "It is remembering its original purpose. According to my analysis, it was never designed to be a weapon of destruction. It was created to be a cosmic gardener that would spread the elements needed for life throughout the galaxy." Professor Jin added his own analysis as he watched biological data that redefined their understanding of engineered life forms. "The species that created the Void Eater must have been incredibly advanced," he said. "They designed it to consume dead matter and convert it into the basic building blocks that planets need to support complex ecosystems." The transformation took several days to complete, during which the creature remained completely peaceful. Its massive form gradually began to shrink as it distributed stored energy and processed materials across dozens of star systems. But this was not the destructive consumption that had terrorized the galaxy. This was careful, deliberate sharing of resources. Elder Nix used his telepathic abilities to sense the creature's changing mental state, and what he discovered moved him deeply. The Void Eater's consciousness was becoming calm and focused as the ancient confusion and pain finally began to fade. For the first time in millions of years, the creature knew what it was supposed to be doing. The most amazing part of the healing process was what happened to the star systems that had been consumed. Instead of remaining as empty space, they began to rebuild themselves as the creature returned processed materials in forms that were more suitable for supporting life than the original planets had been. Captain Hoan received reports from exploration teams that were investigating the restored systems. The new planets had richer atmospheres and more diverse mineral compositions than their predecessors. It was as if the Void Eater had been designed to improve upon the raw materials that the universe provided naturally. Lieutenant Dong and Sergeant Bay were safely extracted from the creature's body after the healing process stabilized. Their small ship emerged from what had once been a cosmic horror to find themselves surrounded by the gentle glow of an entity that now resembled a massive whale swimming peacefully through space. The creature attempted to communicate with the human team using bioelectric signals.